The rise of Magadha in 5th century BC was one of the most important events in ancient Indian history. It was Magadha that gave birth to the first empire of ancient India. And for historians, we see that one of the most important questions in ancient Indian history is why did Magadha become the home of first Indian empire? So in this video, we will try to look at what are the reasons that is being presented by historians to explain this phenomena which we call the rise of Magadha. Now when we look at this period, which is the 6th century BC to 5th century BC, and the term most of the time used is Mahajan Path period. So in this Mahajan Path period, we see that apart from Magadha, there were also other Mahajan Paths that were equally powerful. For example, we have Mahajan Paths like Kashi, Vats, Kosal and Avanti. Now these Mahajan Paths like Magadha were also important Mahajan Paths during this period. But why did Magadha became one of the most powerful Mahajan Paths of this period, and why did it went on to become the first empire in ancient Indian history? So to explain this phenomena, we see that historians have provided different reasons behind Magadha's rise. Now when it comes to the explanation behind Magadha's rise, we see that these explanations can be broadly classified into two types. So the first is the cultural reasons and the second is the geographical reasons. So first we will talk about cultural explanation because it is a short explanation and it does not have many elements. So according to some scholars, the reason behind Magadha's rise has to do with the fact that in Magadha, Brahminical orthodoxy did not have deep roots. So the argument goes like this. Since Magadha was free from the orthodox influence, it became home for heterodox religions like Jainism, Buddhism and Ajivikas. And it was this socio-religious environment of Magadha that greatly helped in the rise of Magadha. Now personally, I believe that this argument is a weak argument simply because we do not have enough reference or enough evidence to show that this cultural environment of Magadha greatly helped in Magadha's rise. There is no metric to suggest that because it was free from the orthodox influence, this was the main reason behind Magadha's rise. So that is why I think that this argument or this reason does not hold any ground. Now coming to second explanation, which is geographical explanation, we find that it has many elements to it and it is a quite broad argument. So we will divide these geographical elements that led to the rise of Magadha in different parts. So the first geographical explanation is the location of Magadha's capital. Now some scholars have argued that when we look at the location of Magadha's capital, for example the old Magadhan capital of Rajgriha and the new Magadhan capital which was Patliputra, when we look at these two capitals, we find that these two capitals were situated in a strategically favorable location. So let's discuss the strategic location of these two capitals. Now when we look at the capital of Rajgriha, we find that it was surrounded by a perimeter of 5 easily defended hills. So it was this strategic location of Rajgriha which meant that Rajgriha could be easily secured from any external threat. So this was the strategic location of Rajgriha. Now when we move to Patliputra, we find that Patliputra was situated on the confluence of two rivers. The first was Ganga and the second was Som. Now through river Ganga during this period, all the trade of the northern plains passed. And we find that because of this strategic location of Patliputra, it was able to control the entire trade that passed through this river. So you can see that both of these two capitals of Magadha, whether we are talking about the older capital Rajgriha and Patliputra, both of them enjoyed a great strategic location. Now coming to the second geographical explanation, according to D.D. Kosambi, he argues that Magadha as a Mahajan Path was located in a favorable geography. Magadha had a complete monopoly over iron ore mines that were situated in southern Bihar region. So because of the location of Magadha, we see that Magadha was able to control the entire southern Bihar region, which was rich in iron ore, meaning that it had also control over the iron ore mines of this region. Now these two geographical factors are quite obvious and they can be found in different history books. But I think that apart from these two factors, there were also other geographical factors that played an important role. Now we will go through these other geographical factors. Now, when we look at the location of Magadha, we see that Magadha is located in the Middle Ganga Valley. So what is the Middle Ganga Valley, you might ask? So when we look at this map of the whole Ganga Valley, we find that the whole Ganga Valley is divided into three parts. So the first part is the Upper Ganga Valley, which starts from the region of Haridwar and it ends around Prayag. From Prayag to the border of present-day Bihar and West Bengal is the region of Middle Ganga Valley. So here you can see that it was in the Middle Ganga Valley that the Mahajan Path of Magadha was situated. Now the reason why Magadha's location in Middle Ganga Valley is important because the soil of Middle Ganga Valley is suitable for wet rice cultivation. Now rice, as most of you would know, yields more per hectare land compared to other crops like wheat and barley. So we see that because Magadha controlled a vast area in which rice can be cultivated meant that it could produce more amount of yield. So the fact that Magadha had a large territory in which rice can be cultivated and this cultivation can support a large population meant that Magadha had a greater human capital compared to other Mahajan Paths of this period. Now we all know how important greater human capital is in a pre-industrial society. So the fact that having a large population, you can engage in different industries and you can also have a large army meant that the region of Magadha was bound to achieve greater prominence in the politics of this period. Now, apart from these factors, we see that another factor which greatly helped in the rise of Magadha was the change in nature of warfare that this period witnessed. We find that before 5th or 6th century BC, it was the chariots that were the most important part of an army. But during this period, we see that the nature of warfare changes. This can be seen from the text of this period. For example, in Arthashastra, chariots are not given the prominent which they used to enjoy in the Vedic period. We find that for Kautilya, it was the war elephant that was the most important part of an army. And this change in the nature of warfare greatly helped in the rise of Magadha. We see that because of this location of Magadha, Magadha had access to forests in which large population of elephants used to reside. And Kautilya even says that it was in eastern India we find that the best elephants for war can be found. So the fact that Magadha had access to large number of elephants meant that it could also deploy them in its army. So because of the reliance on war elephant increased during this period, we find that the army of Magadha also grew stronger because it could deploy more elephants in a particular war. Whereas we see that in other Mahajan Paths, this advantage was not there. Whether we are talking about Kashi, Avanti or even Kosal, we find that here access to elephants was rather limited. So when we look at the complete picture, we find that Magadha had great advantages. First, because of its location, it could support a large population. Second, its location meant that it also has control over large number of iron ore mines, meaning that it could produce large number of iron equipments, particularly weapons. Third, we see that because of Magadha's location again, we find that it had greater supply of war elephants. And lastly, we see that Magadha's capital, whether we are talking about Rajgriha or whether we are talking about Patliputra, both were strategically located. So all of these factors combined meant that Magad was bound to become an important player in Indian history. But what was needed was a great leadership, and that came with the accession of Bimbisar. We find that it was from the period of Bimbisar that the true rise of Magad truly began. And after Bimbisar, we find that the rise of Magad continued under his son Ajatashatru. So both of these rulers paved the way for Magadha's rise. And we find that by the time of the Nandas, Magad had become the first empire of ancient Indian history. Now about the history of Magad from Bimbisar and up to the rise of the Nandas, I have made multiple videos on this topic. And you can watch this playlist where I have included most of these videos. Thank you for watching.